So a very warm welcome back to everybody at the CSU Intensive School. We have with us in our plenary sessions our keynote speaker for today, Jane Needham SC. And I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday morning, hopefully a bit warmer up in Sydney than it is for us in Bathurst. Jane, just to introduce everyone to who Jane is a preeminent lawyer. She is one of Australia's leading lawyers and has worked nationally and internationally. She has advised and appeared for high net worth individuals and clients and families. She predominantly works in the area of succession law and is briefed by a wide range of firms, from single lawyer suburban firms through to international law practices. She is also one of, I believe, and I'll just double check here, one of, I believe, 52 female senior counsel at the New South Wales Bar. So firstly, as I said before, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you again for joining us at CSU Law School for the first time.
You're very welcome, Lisa. I'm really honoured to be asked to give a keynote speech, which sounds very important, but it looks like we'll just be talking about how I do things, which is something which I'm happy to talk about, and I hope it's of some value because, as I said to you just before we started, I've been doing this now for, what day? 32 years and 24 days.
That's good timing. I thought I'd allow you to let us know, how long you've been doing this for, because actually, tactfully, your resume didn't say so. It ranges from Samoa to Fiji to Australia. So it gives us a lot of colour in terms of your background and where you've been and what you've done. And in terms of that, well, what I'd like to do is really, that the theme for today is about self-management, and we hosted. We had the great privilege, and you and I had a little bit of to and froing in our emails about this. We had the great privilege of hosting His Honour Michael Kirby a few years ago on the Bathurst campus, and he noted that two of the essential skills for success in the law was emotional intelligence, and he also emphasised work ethic. He spoke about being on the early bus from Bondi to court to get a jump on the day. And with that in mind, I guess I would ask you, in terms of your experience of working in the law, what professional and personal skills do you consider are important for LLB graduates in terms of learning and working independently?
I should say I have the utmost respect and love for Michael Kirby. I think he's such a trailblazer in the law. He was actually a contemporary of my father, who was also a barrister and later a judge. They shared chambers. They're in the same set of chambers, and two more different people you could not imagine. That's no disrespect to either of them, because they're both excellent lawyers. But what is interesting is each of them would have said, up early on the bus in chambers by 7 a.m, work. And I really think, and I'm very happy to say, that the law has to some extent changed in that respect. And I think that there is a much greater respect for your personal well-being. It is not, of course, not universally applied. I know there are firms and people who don't agree with this, but in my experience, I've found that prioritising time is really the skill that you need to develop. A little bit about my background. When I came to the bar, I was 27. I've done a part-time law degree whilst working as an associate in the Supreme Court, and privilege check. I was working for my father when things like that were allowed. I think I was the last nepotism appointment, but it was a job, a real job, and I worked very hard during the day and I studied at night. When I came to the bar, I was on that work 6.5 days a week train. And in those, you really had to be, in those days, you had to be there to get the directions hearings or the mentions or the briefs that were being tossed around. Whereas I see now the readers that we have coming onto our floor are much better at setting personal boundaries and saying, well, I can do that, but I can't do it until Wednesday when I can put my mind to it and work on it properly. So I would say definitely emotional intelligence is a given. You need to be able to understand the needs of your clients and the needs of the judge and your opponents. There's no point going into court with a bombastic attitude if your judge is much more an empathetic listener. And again, if the judge is someone who's going to tell you what they want, then you need to be able to respond to that. But I think time management, prioritising your well-being on the oxygen mask, yours goes on first principle, so you can help others, is really important. And I had, how many? 3 children during my career at the bar. I had my daughter, who's now 20. So I'd been at the bar for about 12 years when I had her. So I was lucky on that front as well, that my fertility lasted that long. But I was 39 when I had her. And then 2 years later, I took silk. And then 2 years after that, I had twins. So there was a fairly tempestuous period around then when prioritising came down to what is the most pressing emergency at any one time, which is not a great way to run your life, as I think everyone can understand. But as a result of that, I took periods working part-time, would now be called flexible work, but then the label was part-time. And I worked a couple of days a week after my daughter was born. I was still working part-time when I was appointed to silk, and I think I was the first person that I know of to be appointed to silk in a part-time practice. And then I pretty much concentrated on just getting through my practice and my personal requirements with the help of with a lot of help. So when I come to speak to you now, I've got teenagers who are kind of okay at self-regulating in their time, and an independent daughter who's moved out of home. So looking back, I can just see a period of about 10 years where everything was a bit of a hurricane. But in answer to your question, I think the skills are emotional intelligence and time management rather than purely a work ethic. You still need a work ethic, but you need to work that around everything else.
And those are, the question was about it was about professional skills and personal skills, but I feel like I wanted to say I put to you, but it's almost a courtroom kind of effect. But I put to you that those are both that emotional intelligence and time management are both professional and personal skills. That there's a significant crossover between the two.
Absolutely, and as I said, I don't think you can manage your professional life if you're not managing your personal life. And everyone I know has had episodes where your personal life has bubbled over and made it impossible to continue your professional life. And my own examples of that, just recently this year, I got COVID. And unlike most people who apparently get sick for a few days and sail through, I was off work for a month. And that was a really significant period in my life and practice. Luckily, 3 days before I got COVID, a 3-week case had settled. But if it hadn't, you know, I'm speaking to my junior and my solicitor going, what would we have done about that, do you think? But yeah, so I think the personal skills that you need are the ones you need to run your professional life and vice versa. And I do think it's very important to make sure that you have the relationships and arrangements in place which will allow you to deal with things that bubble into your professional life. And I have to say that now courts are so much more respectful of people's personal lives. I was president of the Bar Association for 2014 to 2015, and one of the things that I concentrated on in that time was trying to improve the working life of barristers, particularly barristers with responsibilities outside of the law, such as caring responsibilities. And one of the things I did was I spoke to the Chief Justice, who has a daughter at the bar, which I thought helped, and spoke to him about policies about cases which run over. So sometimes we'll be in court, you've got a witness, the judge will say, we'll just sit on and finish this witness. And half the people in the room, usually the guys, will go, no problems. And the women will all whip out their phones under the bar table, start texting other people, can you pick up my child from daycare? So I spoke to the Chief Justice about that, and we ended up with a policy or an approach, he didn't want to call it a policy, where caring responsibilities were given the same amount of respect as professional responsibilities. And now I was in a case cross-examining a witness. I got a call from the school nurse, and I'm a single mum. I didn't have care at that point because my boys were teenagers, and I just had to say, Your Honour, I'm very sorry, this is the school nurse, I have to take this call. And the judge said, absolutely fine, which 10, 15 years ago would have been professional suicide, really. So I think things have really improved.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I had a similar case, as a similar incident happened this morning. A couple of days ago, my first plan for care of my 8-year-old this morning fell through because that person herself had to work, so that I had to go to plan B. So, and it's that exemplar of needing to have contingency plans, backup plans for your backup plans. And most of our students are very familiar with that, as you and I just discussed before the session commenced formally, that many of them already have caring responsibilities or grown-up children, or having, I think it's an important conversation to have around also caring responsibilities for aged parents as well, not just for children, but also for family members with disabilities, or for aged parents, or for other family members, as we have an aging population as well. I'm not sure whether or not the court's latitude is going to extend to that, how far it will extend.
It's something that we specifically made it caring responsibilities or personal commitments. I had one where I tried to invoke that policy with the judge, and I said, I just will not be able to sit late on this particular day. He said, well, you just need to reschedule your conference. I said, it's not a conference, Your Honour. Pulled out my trump card. I said, it's parent-teacher night. And he said, well, can't someone else do that? I said, organising parent-teacher conferences for twins is really hard. But I didn't get it, so that was a bit unfortunate. But I think it's important here to note that the maintenance of these kind of programs generally, I'm not saying entirely, but generally falls on the female partner in the relationship. And can I give a shout out to all the guys out there who can help with this and take on emotional labour. It's really important in a partnership to have that kind of knowing that is there, that you can rely on the other person and they can step up, and not just when needed, but step up as a truly equal partner. So many women lawyers I know are carrying not only the burden of running a practice, but also the burden of running a home, and occasionally it just gets way too much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And it's my dream that this generation of male lawyers, as they move through into the system, become part of pushing through that change as well, for advocating for taking time for caring and for further, pushing through parental responsibility as well, because then everybody wins.
Yeah, one of the other parts of the work I did as president was getting through some best practice guidelines for victimisation, sexual harassment, bullying and the like, but also a set of guidelines for chambers to adopt so that they could support their members who wanted to work flexibly. And that came in 2015, so we're looking at 7-8 years ago, and 2014, 15. And I'm really happy to say that in my own chambers, the guys are utilising those policies to get for parental leave, and it just is so different an environment than it was when, for example, Michael Kirby and my father were at the bar. my father basically said to me, you can't take time off because you'll lose your practice. And I've taken, as I say, I've taken 3 periods of leave during my practice, 1 to teach and 2 to have babies, and still super busy. So it's nice to know that sometimes people are wrong.
Well, that leads me very neatly into my next question, which is how have you developed your own independent learning and working practices over your career?
Well, I think when I started at the bar when the very first intensive bar practice course, in the very first one, and almost all of the focus in that was on work, how to plead a case, how to draft an affidavit, how to run a directions hearing. Now that I understand the bar practice course and the PLT run by the College of Law and other providers does have quite a lot of wellness, personal development as well in it. But so when I started, it was really being tossed into, well, here you go, here's a profession, do it. And I had 2 tutors, one of whom was very helpful, and the other one not criticising, but just wasn't around as much. But once you finished your first year, you were presumed to be a fully functioning barrister, and there were no formal mentoring structures. So I've been quite. I've found a lot of value for myself in mentoring other lawyers, because I find that, it sounds a bit selfish, but I do it because I get so much out of it. I learn from other people, from young lawyers telling me how they run their practices, how they meet the challenges that I was facing back then, and we both are able to take some out of that. And I understand that a number of people at CSU are career change lawyers, and I think that's such an interesting place to be. When I did law, there were a number of people who were teachers and police officers and the like coming into law, and I think picking up the valuable parts of your previous life and bringing it into your law practice is very helpful. And one of the people I've been mentoring was my Pilates teacher, who was doing a JD, and she had a lot of skills. She'd run businesses of her own. She was a very good communicator, as you need to be as a Pilates instructor. And I was able to connect her with a firm that was looking for people with life experiences, not necessarily bright, shiny, straight out of uni grads, straight out of school, straight out of uni grads. And that was a really valuable experience for me. But I think the most important part of just developing your practice in your life is listening and learning as much as you can. Nobody knows everything. Particularly not me. So listening and learning from as many sources as you can.
We've encouraged our students, all of the faculty, as much as possible to think of their study as a lifelong journey, from everything from Indigenous cultural competence to their study of black letter law and ongoing, that it's going to be the study of law in of itself and everything they do that flows from it will be a lifelong journey of learning. So what you said touches very firmly on that concept of being open to learning. And I really love that, because it's, if you're not going to be open to continuously learning or continuing education, albeit not formal education, then you're going to stop, essentially. So I hope that all of our students have that attitude. Certainly the ones that are here from other places and other careers all seem to be in a good headspace for that. We move on to looking at how, given that you have that position of lifelong learning and ongoing education, what measures then do you use to, determine and evaluate yourself? I mean, it's, can be a little bit confronting at times, but also can be a refreshing opportunity to go, well, are my systems in place? Are those independent systems I've put in place? And are my practices, how effective are they?
I have to say I've come to this fairly late in my career because, as I said, when I started off, there wasn't a lot of guidance around this, and then practicing with 3 young children and later with a marriage split and morphing into a single parent, there hasn't really been a lot of time for that sitting back and taking stock. But there is, of course, an informal process where at the end of every case you sit down and you get the judgment, which is pretty much a critique on how well the points you wanted to make come across. But I think more importantly, something I've been trying to do recently is to sit back and do a regular reflection and a reset of what is working for me, what is not working for me. And I'm coming into a point where I'm about to pivot my career for a few years anyway, while I navigate twin boys in the HSC. That's going to be so much fun. And what I'm trying to do is move away from long trials, which are generally 12 to 14-hour days and a lot of stress, and move into the other part of my practice, which is advice work, succession planning, inquiries, and I'm developing a practice in mediation and collaborative practice. So for that, I'm doing some formal education. I'm recently become a collaborative practitioner, which is really exciting. And I'm looking at doing the family resolution practitioner at the end of the year, just to add another string to my bow. But I think the most important part of it is sitting down every year or so and just thinking about your practice. Is this where I want to be? What's happening? Is there something else I can do? But I've come late to that system of self-reflection.
That's the sort of thing that often people might do over, but potentially only over annual leave periods, if they and kind of sit down and actually kind of fall down and stop and go, okay, that was a year that went by, how did it go? Oh, they might but you're talking about something that's a little bit more constructive.
I'm glad it sounds that way, because it is a bit of like where at the moment, yes, what I'm doing is a fairly focused career pivot, and I'm looking at getting some career guidance with that from a professional coach. And all of this feels quite foreign to me, because as barristers, as independent practitioners, we're kind of told, well, off you go, just do what you need to do. And the thought of structuring or planning your career is quite foreign. The other part of a barrister's life where you do that is when you apply for silk, if you do, because you have to give an 18-month snapshot of your practice to the committee to show them the work that you've been doing, before whom you've been appearing, who you've been appearing against and with, and that's quite a substantial collection of metrics, if you like.
Thank you for mentioning both of those things, because I think one thing I'd be interested in actually asking students to just plop into the chat box, and yet just a yes or no, whether or not they were even aware that there's a whole now industry of legal career coaching, not just career coaching, but legal career coaching, that you can actually get legal. Just a yes or no if you're aware, if you were aware before this moment. Just take a little poll if they're aware of it, because there has been a proliferation over the past, in particular 5 years, of legal consulting or legal coaching for career coaching, and Jane can see those responses coming up in the bubbles.
Mainly,
of course, I didn't set up a poll for this because it's just come out of nowhere, so I'm unable to collate the yeses or no's to take a tally of it, but there seems to be more no's than yeses on average, and that's an interesting one to note, because I can say that it's a very specific industry, and to be able to actually go and seek advice from those legal career coaches, they're all lawyer trained, and they know our industry specifically. It not only is a career direction that you may consider going into as students and graduates. And there's certainly, that's one avenue that you may wish to consider into the future, but and in order to, assist the rest of us, it's a very highly regarded profession, an emerging profession in terms of career coaching. And also it's something that requires a great deal of knowledge and finesse of actually what is going on in the legal industry.
That's right. And I've had a preliminary chat with a career coach, and to the point that my cat's talking across the screen. And I'm looking forward to it because I've spent so much time as a mentor. I've taught at university. I've led through the Bar Association. It'll be very interesting to take a step back and have someone else work with me to really lead me to where I want to go. I hope.
Well, that's fantastic. And in terms of the application to go through and become Silk, thanks for reflecting on that in terms of that application process, because I don't think many of us really know about the inside of that. And I know it was some time ago, but that people talk about taking Silk, but that it does involve, like any major promotion, I think we can refer to it as more than just a major promotion, applying, and that needing to provide proof of 18 months, and that inherently involves a reflective exercise.
It does, and one of the things the Women Barristers Forum does, because traditionally women have stepped back until they feel 110% ready, that we've been trying to encourage women to look at their career around the 10-12 year mark. Traditionally, Silk, you apply for Silk 14 years and up. It's not a rule, but it's traditional. And we've been encouraging women to come to a seminar run by the Women Barristers Forum. There's usually the president or vice president who sits on the applications, and a couple of recent appointees for Silk. And they talk about what they wish they'd known or what they did that was helpful back at the 10-12 year mark to start positioning themselves for Silk. And one of the things that we recommend anyone who's applying for Silk is to start thinking of yourself as a leader from around that 10 to 12 year mark. Start bringing in juniors, whether they're readers or paid juniors, in to share your work, so that you start acting like a Silk by appearing with a junior, working collaboratively and learning from them, getting feedback on your leadership style as well. That's very important.
It's interesting, in order to actually get, achieve that next level, to actually start working as if you are at that next level. It's a significant kind of psychological step to take.
It is. It's closely aligned with fake it till you make it, but it is a learning process, and it's quite important to demonstrate to the judges that you are someone who can lead a team, because that's what a Silk is. They're a team leader, and the difference in practice is quite significant. It's very interesting.
So what methods do you use, I suppose now, predominantly now, to reflect on and assess your own capabilities professionally?
That's interesting, because I'm taking on these new roles of more mediations and more trying to start off with the collaborative practice, which is quite new in my field of laws and states. In terms of court process, as I say, there is continuing feedback, both from the judge and your opponent and your client. But I think recently I was working on quite a difficult advice, and it was a very technical advice in the state administration, and I was still recovering from COVID. I think the brain fog that you hear about, and I was really quite concerned about this, and I actually called one of my colleagues who's a senior junior in the field, someone I've worked with a lot and respect. And I just said, look, one of the gifts in the will is multiple millions of dollars. It's only one gift. I don't want to get this wrong. Yeah. Would you be able to check it for me? And, you know, I suppose traditionally silks have been, this is my advice and it is the law, you know. So I think it's really helpful to be a little bit humble and know when you need to have some reflection on what you're doing. So I apologise to him for conflicting him out of any brief in this matter. He was very helpful and read it over and came back with some comments. So that was really, really good for me. But I think it's a mistake to rely on the award system, you know, the Doyle's Guide and the Lawyers Weekly Awards as measures of success, because really they're, you know, it's great if you get them, but they're not really the measures of success that are important. What's important is how you feel you've done in court, and not just to coast on, well, I did, you know, won that case, I'm going to win this case.
I had a partner when I was in legal practice say to me, you're only as good as the last case that you did, which was very, very much from the old school, very tough in that attitude, in order to kind of ensure that I was constantly frightened, but also constantly terrified to do my best. So I don't know whether or not that was the best motivation. I certainly don't endorse it, but no. But in terms of being, you know, self-reflective and looking at the collegiality of the profession, can I just invite you to speak a little bit further to that, because that's what you reflected on just now about those relationships, being able to call up another colleague and say, you know, I'd like you to look something over and give me your honest, you know, frank and fearless feedback.
I think the collegiality of the profession is something that is so important, and I have found in my own life that I've absolutely thrived with the support of, you know, both informal and formal relationships. And the formal relationships are, of course, your chambers. If you're a barrister, your firm, if you're a solicitor, and we have what's called the open door rule, open door policy, where if your door's open, you can pop your head around and ask a question. And I still do that, as I've said, even though I'm the head of chambers. So it's very, you know, and quite often it's things like I'll pop down to one of the juniors and go, look, I've been asked this question about a return of subpoena. I haven't done a return of subpoena forever. What's the answer? And they'll tell me. And it's really handy. And they pop in, and I make a point of going into chambers a couple of times a week, even though I love working at home, just so that the junior counsel can have that feedback. So that's a more sort of formal structure. And then there are informal structures. I've got my group of ladies. When I was president of the bar, I travelled a lot and I met leading women lawyers from all around Australia. And we've got this kind of informal group. We used to meet at conferences all the time. And now, of course, we're not doing that. So during lockdowns, we used to get together and have a drink and have a chat. But they're all senior women silk who've been in positions of leadership, who know what it's like to have that dual role of, you know, leading a profession during the day and coming home to your teenagers who tell you that you're really cringe, mum, at night. So, you know, all of those things are very useful. And there's a Facebook group which you and I are members of, Lisa, which is called Lawyer Mums Australia.
And I believe there's a few of our colleagues in this space. Hayley McEwen's out as well, and I don't think she'll mind me saying it. And I believe Simone Thackeray, she's in the space as well. So,
well, shout out to the Lawyer Mums, because you can get the answer to anything in that group. And from a legal issue to a personal issue to where can I find this perfect pair of shoes for this function, it's everything. But that kind of support, informal support, and the relationships you make are what really help you professionally, because nobody can do it all.
That's very true. And on that note, what methods would you recommend for future lawyers to reflect on and assess their own capabilities professionally, whether or not they've got enough networks or whether or not they've got enough resources, and what methods, should I have a colleague I very much respect who actually, and I won't name them, but they're not in this space right now, but I know that colleague has a practice of actually spending 2 hours a week carved out for themselves to sit down and do self-reflection and career assessment and, basically evaluating all of these things.
I think that would be very, very useful, and it's something that I've been working towards, and I cannot say I've achieved that. But I do think that, particularly as law students coming into practice, one of the most valuable things I think you can do is join. Now, I know a lot of lawyers are quite introverted, social introverts, tend to like practice at the bar. We love doing our bit in court and then coming back and sitting in our chambers and burying ourselves in books. But particularly for solicitors, the junior solicitors, and sorry, my cat's being annoying. There's a lot of organisations that deal with either practice generally, law student societies or junior lawyer societies. I'm involved in a group called Diverse Women in Law, which seeks to assist women from different backgrounds, whether they be community backgrounds, racial backgrounds, even people who have disabilities. And so it's a group that comes together. Justice Dina Yahir is the chair, and they do some really great work. But they have mentoring programs. Your university, most universities do have mentoring programs with links to the profession. I don't know if CSU does. If they don't, that would be a great thing to set up. And but there are really a lot of programs out there where you can reach out and make contact with the profession, and that way you can have that feedback. You can have those formal and informal support structures which will help you in your career.
Thank you so much for that. And I endorse all of those things. I think it's important and helps keep us to grow. According, as I said at the beginning of this session, according to the New South Wales Bar Association stats, there are currently 52 female senior counsel, including yourself. There's also 328 male senior counsel. You are at the top of your game. So what methods and tools, and I think we've spoken about a few of these, do you use to reflect on and assess your own performance in your current role? The judges obviously keep you on track.
The judges do keep you on track. I suppose what I ask myself is, am I doing what I want to do? And like I say, I've been thinking about that in a more practical sense, because I realise for the next few years that running long trials are going to be very difficult. But keeping myself on track, I look at, one of the things I do is I have a financial advisor, and I meet up with her every quarter. And we talk about things financial, how am I doing? What's the strategy? Am I ever going to be able to afford to retire? That kind of thing. But that kind of check-in every quarter is very helpful for me for staying on track. And I think having that kind of check-in with colleagues and certainly looking at your practice and where your practice is going would be really helpful.
I told some of my students recently that when I was in practice in Melbourne, I realised that I was booking my car in for a service every 3 months, but I never got myself checked in. So I went and saw a life coach every 3 months at the same time as I booked my car in for a service, because I figured that no matter what, I should take as good a care as myself as I should my old beaten up car.
Well, absolutely. And on a personal level, in 2012, I was briefed in the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, and I was briefed for one of the large institutions. And so I knew going into that this would be something that was extremely confronting. And I've never had a criminal practice, and I've never had a family law practice, so I haven't had that exposure to allegations of abuse and the particular stresses that arose out of that. And I won't speak any about it because I know it can be very triggering for people. But what I did was I went to my GP and I said, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to keep myself well? And she gave me 3 pieces of advice. The first was carve out time to do what you like. And she said, Jane, I know you're a very task-oriented list maker person. She said, right, pick something that you really enjoy that's very relaxing for you. And I said, I love a good massage. She said, right, when are you going to have your massage? I thought about it and I thought, well, I can probably manage a 6:30 on a Monday. She said, right, carve it out of your diary, find someone, make that a booking. It just happens. I was like, okay, I can do that. She said, find a psychologist now, start seeing that psychologist and treat it as professional supervision of your practice. Even if you don't need that psychologist because you're not depressed or you're not having a problem, it's very hard to find someone when you need them. You can't crawl out of your hole and go, well, who is the best person to help me with this problem? Form that relationship now. And I'm still seeing her on that kind of professional supervision basis. And it's been fantastic. And the third one was sleep hygiene. She said, sleep is very important. Work on your sleep, start meditating, take melatonin. Here's a prescription for something stronger if you need it, but be aware of the dangers of that. But make sure you get enough sleep. And those 3 bits of advice I have continued with, and really it's kept me personally in a state to do my best professionally.
Thank you so much for being candid about that and sharing that, because one of the reasons why we've chosen this topic of self-management is, well, obviously because the Australian Council of Law Deans sets it for our graduates, so they think it's important, but they think it's important because I think they think it's important because the legal career is hopefully a long one and a productive one, but it's also a rigorous one, no matter which direction you go in and what you do with it. And we invest as a faculty a lot in our students. They've invested a lot in this. They've left other careers. They've all got obligations. We know that they've all got other obligations. Some of them are still running those businesses. They're still working full time or in other jobs. Caring for families, are getting a lot of nods in the space here. They're caring for families, they're caring for loved ones, and they're doing the degree. So as a faculty, we take all our hats off to them. But so we want to encourage them to be doing these things now, these self-management things now as students, and setting themselves up for success both as students, but also to carry that out into their working lives as law graduates, no matter what they do with it. And it's one thing for us to be, as faculty who they know and they see all the time, to be saying it. It's another thing to be hearing it from somebody who has actually implemented those things and over a successful long period of time. And it's wonderful to be able to hear that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. On that note, what methods and sources of feedback would you recommend to our future lawyers sitting in this space to support their own professional and personal development?
I think we've really covered that in the sense of you need to be proactive about it, but there is also a lot out there to help you. The Law Society and the Bar Association both have very good professional resources, and once you graduate and you have a practicing certificate, you need to do CPDs, continuing professional development. We have to do 10 hours a year. Now, I wish there was a CPD training scheme because I would be very wealthy, and because I basically, well, this counts as CPD, but what I would say to you is go out and be really thoughtful about what you do, because you have to do it. You usually have to pay money for it. Really find programs and talks and seminars that help you. Don't just go to one of those, 10 points in one day thing in late March when you tick all your boxes. Really, there's so much out there and so many amazing people giving their time freely into CPD, and you can learn so much. So find out from, the top people in the field, what's the latest case update in your field. Don't stick around for the, things that aren't relevant for you. Be really thoughtful and intentional in what you learn. And the other thing is the associations, Law Society and the Bar Association, both have personal support programs as well. Familiarise yourself with those. We've got Bar Care, which has a social worker who's on call 24/7 basically, and she will triage your issue, whether it be financial, whether it be psychological, whether you just need someone to talk to. We provide yoga classes in the Bar Association. We've just set up a program of free personal trainer sessions to get people moving and active. We have bushwalking programs. We I saw a question about childcare and looking at women's needs. We had until recently until COVID, a program where we guaranteed spots in a childcare centre in the city. But we found that with COVID, people were moving their children to places near where they live. So we haven't got that program anymore. Instead, we have emergency childcare support linked with agencies that can help in when people have crises. So there is a lot out there. And what I can say to you is go and look for it, because it's all there. Whatever kind of support you need, you can usually find it. And if you can't find it formally, then reach out to a mentor and try and find it there. But don't sit back and try and do everything yourself, because no one can do everything yourself.
Thank you so much for that, Jane. That brings me near the end of, at the end of our agreed questions. We do have some wonderful questions from our students in the chat box, but because they're questions without notice, what I'd like to do is, would you like me to stop the recording and we can go to an informal part of the session?
I'm happy to do that, but I've been reading the questions as they go and I can probably answer most of them.
Okay, would you like the recording to be suspended at this point?
I don't mind.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's all right, then what we'll do is we'll continue the recording if that's suitable. Let me know if at any point you'd like me to pause or stop the recording.
Right.
And I'm happy for if the students that have asked the questions would like to address them. We've got Alison Bermudez. If Alison, if you're in the space, you've got a lovely question here about COVID. Would you like to pop your mic on if you're in a space to do so and address that to Jane?
Hi, Jane. How are you?
Hi, Alison. How are you?
Good. I was just wondering more obviously I can understand the lawyer perspective, but how COVID affected you as a barrister and whether your sort of remote working or flexible working practices have continued, because most law firms still are practicing remote or flexible work practices, and whether that still applied to you in your barrister space.
Yes, it does. I've worked from home one day a week even before lockdown. I was doing it before it was cool. And I was reasonably well set up when lockdown started. From preference, I would work at home, but as I say, because I'm in a leadership role, I try and go and work in chambers a couple of days a week. My assistant is a real extrovert and she gets a bit lonely, so I try and go and hang out with her, give her things to do. But the chambers are much quieter than they used to be. People are working from home. People are coming in when they need to, and we are thinking creatively about how we use our chamber space. We've got to change our conference room into a virtual courtroom, and that's been a really great change. But I'm practicing quite a lot from home and trying my very best to become paperless. So
that's fantastic to hear, I guess, with the whole work-life balance with children and juggling and things, that would really be helping in that space as well.
It is, and I find that one thing I can do is, rather than getting home at 6 o'clock and being a bit stressed and throwing together something, I can actually make quite a nice dinner and have that ready for when the boys come home, and I can make sure they're allegedly doing their homework. But when I'm in court, obviously all bets are off, but generally it works quite well.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. We have a question from our our CSU Law Society president, Nikki McGuinness, about how to brief counsel. Nikki, are you in the space at all?
I am. Hi, how Jane? How are you?
Good, Nikki. How are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I was just wanting to ask you if you had any tips for students in terms of briefing counsel in the future, whether there's any things that they should avoid or should do to make it easier for counsel when they're providing advice or preparing for trial.
Sure. Great question. One of the best things you can do is ask what they need, and I like to be asked, what. Well, I always say, please just brief me electronically. First instance, if we need paper, we can talk about that. The documents that you need, think about what you're asking them and make sure they have all the documents, preferably in a sensible order. There is on the Bar Association website a guide to briefing barristers, which is really good. And you can look at that, and it gives you an index, like a draft index to a brief, how to do observations. And I think observations are probably one of the most important things, rather than giving someone a bundle of paper and trying to work out, what it is. Your observations as the lawyer who knows the most about the case is really valuable. And rather than just, here's a bundle of documents, here's an index, you can talk about what the complexities are, if there are particular complexities of the client. Not every client is aware of how cases work, and it might be that just a meet and greet is helpful. I found that I do a lot of work in wills and estates, and you get people who aren't sophisticated, who've just been thrown into litigation because of family conflict, and they don't really understand what's happening. So sometimes just saying, look, can we have 15 minutes for a Zoom, or I'll bring the clients by and we'll have a chat. And then they know who you are and what you're doing. And I've always found that very helpful, but it's something that's not often done.
It's very much a human approach, particularly in an area that's often with so much emotion.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, Nikki, for that really on-point question, because that's certainly one of the first questions I had when I went into practice. Sean Gaynor, are you in the space? Fantastic. Sean, could you ask put your question to Jane?
The reason I was asking the question is you were talking about how, in the previous time, that you found it very hard to balance work and family commitments at the same time. Would something like having larger firms that had the resources enabled to meet these sort of things, be able to establish childcare centres within those areas, so you can actually, instead of having to rush home, as you said, and getting these text messages, and then left to deal for yourself directly, you could actually, you're not far from it, you could actually, once you get a call, you could go down, to whatever the level, whatever it was, and then be able to have, like not having to travel, but where it's more directly inside the firm itself. Would that help in a lot of ways?
That would help. One of the things that we looked at when I was bar president was whether we should actually have a childcare centre like that. And
okay.
We're not huge. We have about 2,200 members. Not all of them, of course, parents. Interestingly, women at the bar, only 50% of women at the bar have children, which is way under, like, the general profession. It's close to 70. So bar tends to, I don't know whether it tends to attract or it's better for people who may not have children. I don't know. Doesn't affect men. Men have the same number of children at the bar or elsewhere. And we found that the regulatory environment around childcare was so intensive, it wouldn't actually work. And that's why what we did was we partnered with a childcare provider, and they guaranteed, we started off with 10 spaces in the city, and one of the childcare centre, I think, was in Martin Place. So from Phillip Street to Martin Place, that was really handy. And one of the barristers on my floor has her 4-year-old at childcare in that, even though the Bar Association no longer guarantees the place. But we put money into it. It cost us about $100,000 in the first year to have these places sitting there waiting for people to take them up. But the uptake was reasonably good. But then, of course, with COVID and the lockdowns, people found that they weren't coming into the city, so having a child care centre in the city was not terrific.
Practical.
But I think the emphasis on parenting, it needs to be a parenting focus rather than a female-oriented focus, because I think the conversation about parenting needs to be from both parents, whether they're single-sex, same-sex parenting or heterosexual couples or single parents. We've all got the same issues that need to be dealt with. I think that the firms, the big employers, are in a really good position to make that change.
Yeah,
So
because would that like encourage like also people retaining staff as well? You know, like we have the burnouts, and as you were talking about before, some have early in their careers, whether they're male or female, and because of this situation with family commitments, is trying to balance that with work and that as well.
Absolutely, and the work that the Bar Association has done about making the bar a better place to work, live and work, has been really useful in that. And I know the Law Society has been concentrating on that as well. That kind of retention is so important, because women at the bar, as Lisa pointed out, there are very few women silk. One of the issues is not just seniority, although the largest demographic of the bar is men over 60. There are more men over 60 than there are anything else. But one of the problems is women mid-career leaving at about 7 to 10 years. And we haven't really been able to put a finger on that. There are a number of reasons. Can't go into them all now, but it would be great to have better retention. So thanks.
All right, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your questions from all the students. They were really insightful, and I hope that the other students will agree with me that they're really much on point in terms of being helpful and practical moving forward. And I really appreciate your generosity in answering them, Jane, and also again for your time this morning. It's given us an insight into the life of a barrister, or at least the life of one particular barrister, and also because things keep changing. We're in this post-COVID period as to what's going to happen next. When you talk about, I got very excited for a moment when you said you've turned your conference room into a virtual courtroom. I thought that's fantastic. That's really innovative use of space, and to hear about those things happening as we go on, how will very traditional organizations move with those changes? I just want to lastly just say thank you on behalf of all of us, and invite everyone to express their thank yous in the traditional format. I'll let the last word go to our Professor Mark Nolan, and hope very much that we'll see you again in future sessions, Jane.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. There was wonderful praise in the chat there for everything that you've achieved as president of the Bar Association as well. So I'd endorse that too. Thank you for what you've said about coaching, about mentoring. I am a twin, so I can only just apologise. And look, good luck as you do that career pivot in the structured and exemplary way that you have set out to do so. And if the students can take away that sort of advice about how changes can be supported and proactively managed, that's one of the many bits of wisdom that you've given us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. As I say, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm very appreciative of all these nice messages coming through.
Thank you. And look, we're going to now welcome Magistrate Ellis to have a meet and greet with me. I'll take her through some questions for 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a presentation from Nikki McGuinness as the president of the Charleston Law Society before our next speaker, Michael Pacino. So I think I have found in the screens Magistrate Ellis appearing.
Well, good morning, and I hope you can.
Yes. Are you able to turn a camera on? Are you comfortable to do that?
Well, I hate to sound like a precious little judicial officer,
but you prefer not to?
No. I usually have people who can help me with this.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
it is my lack of skills. So if I knew where the camera was, I would be happy to do so. I even did my hair nicely,
Yes.
so people could see me. So
And look, I might get you to stop sharing screen, Lisa, as well, if we can do that, and that might help everyone see Magistrate Ellis more clearly. So on the bottom left of the screen, there's a video camera icon. If you just click that, so the red diagonal line disappears, the camera should come on.
We have her. No, she was there for a moment and then she was gone.
oh dear. Well,
That's all right. No, you're still with us, but your camera just popped out for a moment there, Your Honour.
yeah. Look, I am the first to say I am shocking at maths, and I am